Oh, okay. So today we're talking about jQuery. Does anyone know what jQuery is? I'm going to take a random stab at it. Mark?
It's like a library of sort of pre-created formulas and sort of things that you can use
Yeah.
Instead of actually writing the code itself.
Yep. Yeah. Very exactly. It's a library. So it comes with like pre-made functions that you can use. And it allows us to create and manipulate elements on our page. So we'll look at that today, how to use it to show and hide things on our page. So we've looked at a little bit how we do that with CSS. Now we're going to look at how we do that with jQuery, which is a little bit different and adds a lot more functionality to our JavaScript. It also lets us do things like collect the user input from forms. So we can create a form with HTML, but what happens when you put information in? Where does it go? jQuery is what we use to extract that information. And we'll look at using, throughout this, we'll use a bit more of JavaScript's inbuilt functions. So we'll learn a couple more of those along the way. But we'll start off with a little review. So last week, we started off with JavaScript, and we looked at console logs first of all. What's a console log? We've been using them all week. What's a console log?
Something that lets you display or print on the page.
Yeah, exactly. It lets you display or print something on your, in your terminal, on your page. It's for like the developer. Sorry, not on your page, but in your
that side
browser. On this side, right in here. Or like in your terminal if you're using a terminal. But that's what that is. Awesome. And then we looked at data types. What data types do we have? String, yeah. And what's a string?
Anything between quotes. Any character.
Yeah. Words and letters and numbers between quotes. So, console log. What data type is this? String. Cool. What's another data type? What's this one? Number. What about starts with a B? It's either this or this. Boolean, yeah. Awesome. Cool. Then we talked a little bit about variables. What's a variable? What would happen? What happens if I print out this? What am I going to see on the right side? Yeah, so a variable is like a little storage container for any information that we want to save or use later. Then we looked at functions. And functions are a block of code that will execute when we call it by its name, and it's a good way of being able to repeat certain actions on code. So if we wanted to see if a number is odd, say This is that modulo that Mark, you were talking about earlier, to see if a number is divisible by 2 and then rounded. Let's say by 2, and if it doesn't equal 0, then we know that that's odd. And then I can use this function as much as I want. Console log it. And now I get a Boolean. So that function works to tell me whether or not a number is odd or even. Then we've got if statements. Anyone tell me what an if statement is?
Conditional says if one thing happens, do another thing.
Exactly. It's a conditional. So if this evaluates to true, then do this. So if I wanted to put this into an if statement, I could say, so if it's odd, return this. And if I wanted to do something if it's not odd, what's the keyword I would use here? I want to give it something else to do. If else. So there's two options here, actually. Trick question. If else, I could use to evaluate another condition. So let's say, okay, I've totally written that wrong. Sorry, guys. Please ignore that part and that. My terminal hates me today. Okay, that is not how you write an if statement. Don't do that. That was bad. That's how you write an if statement. And that's not how you write an if statement either. Oh my god. Get it together. We're going to return, let's say, this is odd. Okay, just rewind and pretend that I didn't do that. So this is what an if statement would look like. So this is evaluating a condition. And it's going to return this string. And actually, it's even if that's true. And then in my if-else statement, I can do that again. But let's say if it's divisible by 3. This is kind of a backwards way of doing it. Because if it's not divisible by 3, then it's going to be odd or even. We'll print it out and find out. Right. Who can spot my error? Awesome. Good spot. Cool. So, yeah, so this is even. And this is odd. Does that kind of make sense? Even with some shaky syntax from me. We've got the if statements. Yeah, it's basically a conditional, and it will evaluate a true or false. And then return what you want it to. And then you can also use else, and that's like your ending an if statement almost. Well, you're kind of saying, like, if it does this, do this, but if anything else, like anything, then do this. Do that with 1. No, because it's odd. Give it 1. also odd. If I give it a string. Okay, high is not odd. My function's broken. That's weird. Why is it doing that?
You change it to like, instead of saying not equals 0, say equals 0.
Yeah, good idea.
The
Oh
string, like,
yeah,
does
that's
not
true. It
equal
probably
anything.
evaluates to 0. It's even. Nope. So it's probably converting that into a number and then evaluating it.
No, so now you have to switch it, right? Because if it is equal to 0, then it should be even.
Oh yeah.
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 But that should work.
Even, nope, and nope. So I wonder, I'm going to see what type it is. I'm just going to print out. It's just an experiment. Type of, no. It's that type of, I can never remember. Ah, that's why. Oops, spoiler alert. You saw nothing.
Oh, I think for the odd one too, like 11's odd, but it's not divisible by 3.
No, but that's what the modulo is for. So, oh no. I'm so confused right now.
Yeah, anything. Because what right now you have is it's odd if it can be divisible. If it's divisible by 3 and there's no remainder,
That's
then
right.
it's odd.
Yes.
But it's just anything that's not divisible by 2.
Yeah, you're right.
But then that gets into like, well, strings not divisible by 2, so is it odd?
Okay, this is a bit out of scope of today. I've just got really curious about this, but we'll leave that for now. We can always come back to it later. So back to JavaScript. Well, this is JavaScript. Okay, objects. Let's erase that. Can anyone tell me what an object is?
Keep it as a test for it. Just figure it out.
Yes. Take my bad code and make it better. And there will be a prize. Objects. What's an object?
Organizing information with the key or key and value.
Exactly, yeah. It's a way of organizing information, storing information by using key value pairs. So it's data that has like a label attached to it. So we can store objects inside variables. Whoever wrote this was a big fan of literature. I didn't know he was 60 years old though. I'm using like example code so I don't have to think of it while I'm actually talking. Cool. So this is what an object looks like. If I was to print console log, I'd get the entire object back. What if I wanted to print out the name? What would I do? There's 2 different ways we can do it. I will accept either answer.
Console log person.name.
Awesome. Person.name. Sherlock Holmes. And that's dot notation. Does anyone remember the other way? Brackets. print out age, brackets, and quotes. And then we get age back. What if I wanted to print out Watson? Make this a little bit. I'm going to make this an object for now, and then we can do the array way in a minute. Okay, now what would I do if I wanted to print out Watson? Let's start with connections. I'll use the dot notation. Ooh. Exactly. Yeah. So you could do connections dot friend, and you'd call it by the label. So you could chain those together. It's not working though. Because I didn't close my brackets, so I missed the bottom one there. But now we get Watson, so you can use it by dot. If I went back to how I had it before, what's this called?
An array.
An array, yeah. And what do we use arrays for?
Lists, more or less.
Lists, yeah, basically lists. It's another way of storing information where like lists are important. And how would I access Watson now?
Person.connections, and in the regular brackets, 0.
Yeah. So we access arrays by using these square brackets here. And why is it 0 and not 1?
Starts counting at 0.
Starts counting at 0. Arrays always start at 0. If I wanted to get this one in, go 1. All right. So now loops. What's a loop? So it's a loop is basically a way of repeating an action on a set of data over and over again until a certain condition is met. So you can perform an action on a set of data multiple times. For that, I'll actually go to out of the 3 here, FizzBuzz, Yellow Pager, and word count, is there one that in particular you want me to go over, or do you want me to do an entirely different loop? I'll just do like a little practice of it. I think we went over FizzBuzz at the end of last class. We didn't do, and we did Yellow Pager a little bit. Any like, Mark?
I was able to figure out FizzBuzz and word count kind of on my own. The Yellow Pager was just a little bit beyond me, but
Okay.
that's my vote. I don't know about anybody else.
Cool.
I think that was the hardest one.
Yellow
Yeah.
Pager? Yeah, for sure. Let's do Yellow Pager. Cool. So we're going to write a function that takes in a 10-character string of letters and returns a phone number. And we want to map it basically by the number to one of 3 letters as if it was on the phone dial. Like, because we're pretending we're in the 90s and we were doing the texting. I can't remember what it's called. T9 texting? Yeah. Okay, so First up, we're going to write a function, yellow pager. And we're going to take in an argument, which is going to be a string. So I'm going to call it word. So this is my function, and if I want to call this function, I'm going to use console log yellow pager. And I have to give it a parameter. Someone give me an animal with a long name. Cheetah. Awesome. No, that's good. No, that's perfect, actually. As I said, I was like, someone's going to say emu. That's just not going to do. Cheetah's perfect. Thanks, Hillary. Okay, cool. So first of all, I always like to do this whenever I write my functions. I just like to make sure that I'm actually getting what I think I'm getting. So I'm just going to return word and make sure. Cool. We've got cheetah, so that's great. Okay, so what's the first thing we kind of want to do with this? Because we've got our word, we've got cheetah, but we want to compare each letter to, like, we want to look at each individual letter, not necessarily the whole word. So do you remember what the JavaScript, there's a JavaScript function that's built in that lets us deconstruct the word. I'm trying not to say what it's called. Do you remember what it's called? Split. Yeah. Cool. And I'm going to store that in a variable, so I have it. I'm going to call it letter. And the way I type that is .split. And I want to separate it by like the no space. If I wanted to separate it by spaces, I could put a space in here, but I just want to separate it by the nothingness. Okay, now I want to see that that has worked. So I'm going to return letter, and now I have a nice array with each individual letter. What's the other thing I want to do to this information before I start comparing it? I've got 1, 2, 3, 6 lovely lowercase letters here, but I've got a rogue uppercase. And I could write a function that compares all the lowercase letters to all the lowercase letters, and then all the uppercase letters to all the uppercase letters. But I'm super lazy, and I'm not going to do that. Yeah, totally. I could do all uppercase if I wanted to. I think we did lowercase last time, so we can do uppercase. No. That's right. I'm going to store it again. We're going to overwrite that variable. I'm going to say letter equals letter dot to uppercase.
You might need to do it in the opposite order.
Other way around?
Yeah, because...
Yeah, good shout. Because I'm trying to do that on an array, and that's not going to work. This is not a string, so it's going to be word to uppercase. Thank you, right? And then I'm going to split it. There we go. So now I've got an array, all uppercase. So now I'm ready to compare these. So to compare them, I can write some if statements. And I could, if I wanted to, I could say if, let's see, letter 0 and that's going to give me C equals A, then do this, then do that. But then I'm going to have to write that code for every single letter in that array. So instead of that, I mean, I'm still going to do that, but I'm going to do it inside a for loop because that's going to let me do it multiple times. So I'm going to say for I equals 0. So this is my index. And this is my condition that when this evaluates to true, it's going to stop the for loop. Does anyone remember how I might do that? With my variable, so I'm going to use my variable letter. And I want it to stop when it's got to the end of this array. I should really call it letters.
Letters dot count.
So close.
Dot length. Okay.
Dot length, yes.
Because it starts at 0 for an array, does it feel like -1? Or is it...
No, good question. If I wanted to access the end of an array, I could say letter.length -1. And that would give me like the ending index. But this just says like start at 0
Yeah,
as
I
it,
guess it's
as it
less
would.
than, not less than or equal, so it doesn't go all the way to the
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say increase the count by 1 every time. So increase the index. So once you're done evaluating this letter, then move on to the next letter. Okay. And then in my for loop, I'm just going to I'm going to console log what I get in here because I want to see what letter I is. So letter is letters. So I've changed that. A little bit bigger. Letters is our array, and I is the index that gets increased by 1 every time. So when I print it out, I get a nice list of the letters I've got. And I'll change that there too. So now for each individual letter, I'm going to go if letters I equals to A, or, and so these two pipes are the way we say like or. You can also use 2 ampersands to say and. I'm going to say or if letters, and I have to do this every time. I can't just say or B or C. I've got to evaluate it each time by stating B or letters equals C. And if that's true, then, okay, and so this is what I'm going to do as well, is I'm going to make another variable, and this is going to be like my result variable that I want to return. I'm just going to call it result, and I'm going to make it an empty string so that I can return a string of numbers. I could, if I made it a 0, then it would just like plus, the way that I'm going to write it, it would just like plus each one on. But if it's a string, it just concatenates them. And that works well for what I want to do. So then I can say result, which is at the moment an empty string. If I say plus equals, what is it? It's going to be 2. Plus equals 2. So now should get 2, but I'm not. Because I'm not returning result, which is why. Cool, so now I get 2 because it's looked at the first letter and got a C and evaluated to 2. Good word choice, because it was in the first 3 letters of the alphabet, the first letter. Okay, so then I'm going to say else if, and I can just copy this code actually, and I'll change it to D, E, and F. And if that's true, then I want to add a 3. So now we can see we get 3, 3, 2. Change it to strings. Should really be 2, 3, 3, shouldn't it? Anyway, any questions about that so far? Apart from that one, which we can now find out. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Plus. I'm just going to try and print out again letters I. Letters. Okay, I'm going to print out.
Oh, you forgot to put the I with the C. Where the C is, it just says letters equals C.
Ah, good spot. Thanks, Hillary. And then for F as well. There, okay. Now please work? Okay, now it works. That's right, because that was the A, not the C that I was looking at. Cool. So how does that make sense? Question? So for the E's, it's looked at, so
So it's just gone through those so far and none of the other, okay.
yeah, so the first thing this for loop does is takes the C in Cheetah and goes, if this, like, you can pretend letters I don't know why I'm pointing at my laptop, sorry, instead of using the mouse so you can actually see. If letters I, which is the C, equals A, or if it equals B, or if it equals C, then like append 2 onto our results. So it's done that with the first 2, and then it moves on to H, but it doesn't find anything for H, so it just keeps going. Then it goes to E and appends the 3, because we've got this statement in here. Then it goes to the next E, appends another 3, and then the 2 is the A. That kind of makes sense. I won't do the whole alphabet. I will leave that to you guys, but any other questions? Okay. Okay, so now we'll go back to jQuery. Just wanted to do a fairly lengthy review on JavaScript because it's a big section of this this course. But now we'll talk about jQuery. So we'll talk about the DOM, which stands for the Document Object Model, and this is basically what your browser creates when you give it HTML. It takes all of your HTML and builds something which you can kind of think of it like a tree. And it's a data structure, And to change a page's style or like markup in DevTools, you do it by accessing the DOM. And to do that, when we've already got a page built, we use jQuery. So jQuery is a JavaScript library, and it's a way of making your web pages, well, it's designed to help make your web pages interactive. It lets you use a lot of helper methods, like we were talking about, built-in Java functions that you can use that do things like hide elements when you click them, or collect form data. And when I say library, it's basically just like a file that you can put in your app that contains functions that we can use. Cool. So before we can use jQuery in our projects, we have to create a JavaScript file. We have to use JavaScript. So did everyone choose a project and download the starter code for it? Cool. So you will have, I think you've got your index.js file, and that's your JavaScript file, and it probably looks like this at the moment.
And the download was the same regardless of which project we picked.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The download, it's starter code for everything. So and it should just have, basically you'll get your index HTML, which is just a nice like little starter page. Your index.js, a README. Does anyone know what a README is? Did you have a README in your file? Okay, yeah. A README is just something that explains what's in your project, and it's used for when we use GitHub, which is a way of like storing your code. It just provides like a nice little interface for this is what this thing does. But you can pretty much ignore that, and then you should have a blank CSS file as well. So in our index.js, actually, so in our index.html, we have to import our JavaScript and our jQuery. And the way we do that is by using the script tag. So this is basically to connect JavaScript to an HTML file. You can basically, sorry, I'm totally losing my voice. So we use our source, which is the path to the file, and then we use the type, and that says what type of script you're connecting. So whether it's JavaScript or jQuery. There's two places you can put this. You can have your script in the head. So if I wanted, this is my JavaScript script, or you can have it down at the bottom in the body, right before the body closing tag. The reason we put it here is because the browser won't load, if it's in the head, basically, the browser won't load any images or style sheets, so our CSS, until after the scripts are fully loaded. So it can mean that your page loads a little bit slower, whereas if you put it right at the bottom, it lets the browser load the styles and the images, and then it appears fully loaded, even if the scripts are still downloading. So even if like the browser's still pulling in the JavaScript jQuery. So for JavaScript and jQuery, generally, just pop it in the bottom just before the body tag. Everything else, like any links, linking your CSS, that goes in the head. But these two go at the bottom. It doesn't matter too much for like a kind of lightweight web page that's mostly information, but it's good practice to get into for down the line. Cool. And then to add jQuery, there's two ways of doing that. You can go and download jQuery from their website, and then you would just import it the same way I've got my JavaScript tag here. Or you can use the Content Delivery Network script, and you basically just copy and paste it in, and it imports jQuery. A lot easier. I would recommend using it this way. Cool. So I've got a little code pen set up to practice jQuery, and it's got really similar code to what we just looked at, but we've got a HTML page, just says jQuery practice, and I've got a main with I've got a div for square, two divs with some spans in between. And we're gonna look at some ways that we can play around with those. And then I've just put some basic CSS on it. We've got display box or flex box, display flex, and then the squares are styled with borders so we can see. So first things first, in our HTML, I'm just going to copy and paste my script tag and my jQuery tag. Not twice, though. I might not need the JavaScript file. I think in CodePen it knows that that is the JavaScript file anyway, but do need to import jQuery. But properly. There we go. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can pretty much ignore the HTML, CSS for now. So we added jQuery, all good. And yeah, we looked at getting started. So in jQuery, everything we do, we can basically the way that we access elements is the exact same way that we would do in CSS. Can anyone remember the ways that we would access an element in CSS? Class, yeah. Class is one. There's some more. ID, yeah. And also like tag. So if I have like in my HTML here, I've got main and body div, so by their tag name as well. So there's the main kind of three we'll be looking at. And it works the exact same. By class would be class name. It would look the exact same. What do we use if it's a tag in front of the name? An ID in front of the name. Yeah. Tag name. Cool. All right, so I'm going to bring in this function. This function here has to be in your JS file, and everything you do is going to be inside this function. The reason we have this is so that all of the jQuery that gets used only happens when the page has actually loaded. So if we didn't have that, it would just like start firing commands at your browser while it's trying to load the page. And it might try to access an element that doesn't actually exist yet, and there would just be collision. So this says when the web page is ready, then do this. This $sign is just a short form for jQuery itself. It's basically just like saying jQuery. But you'll see this a lot, and a lot of the stuff we do has the $sign. It's just a shortcut. The document refers to the document object model, so this like tree structure with all of our HTML. And ready is the function that will run our jQuery when the document is loaded. There is a nice short form way of writing this as well. You can just say jQuery function, and that performs the exact same action as this document ready function. But we'll leave it like this for now. So to select an element, like we were saying, we can access them by tag names, classes, IDs, and also nested tag names like we did in CSS as well. But let's say if I wanted to select all of the paragraphs, I would use P for the tag name and select, and that would select all of my paragraphs. It's not going to do anything on the screen yet because all we're doing is just sort of like grabbing them. We're not manipulating them in any way yet, but that's how you would use a selector. Similarly, if I was going to access class name, I would write class name like that. Or if it was a tag name, the $sign. Or if I wanted to do nested tag names, I could say section P span, and that would access the spans, the paragraphs in that section, just like we would in CSS. So like in my HTML here, I've got a content box, and to select that, because it's an ID, let's say content box. Everyone with me so far? Cool. So before now, we've seen a couple ways of using CSS for animation, so making things move on the screen, and that's something we can also do with jQuery by using our built-in helper functions. All of the helper methods that we use are going to take in an argument. All of the ones that we're going to use are going to take in an argument which represent the amount of time that a transition takes. So it's really similar to the transition duration that we used in CSS when we were looking at like the fade in and fade out. So we'll do a hide and show. And let's hide the first square. So I'm going to first access this first square by using the class name. And then I'm going to write hide. I'm going to give it 500 milliseconds. And now it's gone. If I comment it out, it comes back. So that's just a quick way of hiding. You can also do show. So if I want it to come back, gonna do it. Maybe it's just gonna hide it. No, it's because I haven't written that right. Cool, so now when it loads up, and it's only gonna do it once, if I comment it out and then uncomment, it's gonna run again, it's gonna hide it and then show it. Does that make sense what I've done with that so far?
Sorry if I missed it, but what are the numbers again?
Oh, the numbers are they just represent the time. So 500 milliseconds and 1,000 milliseconds. So the time. If I took it out, it would just happen straight away. And I mean, this isn't doing anything because it's just like freaking out right now, going like, I'm trying to hide and I'm trying to show. But yeah, milliseconds. Cool, so that is, we talked about selecting elements, and I'm getting ahead of the slides, but showed you those jQuery animations. This is the hide and show. And the next one we've got is slide up and down. So we can do that as well. So instead of hide and show, let's say slide up. And now, if I uncomment it, get a nice little sliding, it's sort of like compressing on itself, but that's the slide up. And then I can do a slide down as well. Slide up, slide down. I could also do this on our main container first. So if I wanted to access the main container, what selector would I use? There's two options actually, but I like ID because it's a bit more specific. So what would I type in here? If this is the ID. Yep. Exactly. And I'll do the same. Maybe it's gonna do it. Maybe it's not. Main ID. Try hide. Wonder if I change it to main. Okay, something's going on with the ID, but it works for the tag name. Someone else has had this problem too. I can look at that later, but for now, if we access it by main, then we can use the hide and show. Make it disappear and reappear. So we've got hide, show, and we've got slide up and slide down. You can also put in a delay. So with our slide down, basically everything we've seen so far happens as soon as we refresh a page, or as soon as the page loads up. So if we wanted to maybe delay it a little bit so it's not like animating right as soon as the page loads, you can add in a delay. To do that, we would set a dot delay. Dot slide up and dot delay. Cool, so now we've got a nice delay where it slides out and slides down. Doing this is just a way of chaining functions together. So each one is a function, and we're just like popping them on the end, so they're all acting on the same thing. And you can, this kind of thing, like you could chain as many of these on as you want. To keep it readable, I wouldn't, but you could do. Okay, so far all of the elements that, or all of the animations that we've seen happen as soon as we refresh the page or with a delay. But usually we want things to happen on interactions or when an event happens. So we'll set up event listeners. And event listeners can be attached to things on forms like buttons, hovering over an element, so similar to our hover that we used in CSS. And we can use jQuery to listen for these events and then run some code when they happen. So an event handler looks like this. Again, we're accessing the element by using a class name or an element or ID, and then using a built-in function. So this is click. So on click, run this function. So yeah, click events. We wanted to say cool. So I'm going to try and access the main again. And on click, I want the second square to slide up. So in theory, when I click in here, there we go, it's going to slide up. I could say slide down, wait for it to reload. So now it's not going to do anything until I click. And then it's not going to slide down. Okay, now we've got the slide up. So that's how you add an on-click event. You can also have mouse events, so on mouse enter. And this is basically exactly like the hover in CSS. We're just now using JavaScript to override the browser's default styling. So to use mouse enter, I'm going to use my commented out code from here. So again, we're going to access the first square and use the dot on, and that is just a shortened version of a jQuery like helper function. So on mouse enter, and that's the keyword, then hide the first square. So now when I hover over it, it disappears. It doesn't reappear because I haven't told it to reappear. But I can do that with mouse leave. So if I wanted to do that again, and instead of mouse enter, I'll say mouse leave. And instead of hide, I'll say show. So now hover over and it disappears. And I can just like make it keep hiding and reappearing that way. Everyone with me so far? Cool. So now forms. Okay, now it's just totally freaking out. Stop. Just stop.
When you use click and stuff, you use like literally anywhere.
Depending on what you target. So if I use click, I'm gonna switch over to this one now, where I've got my form set out. If I use click on main, then anything within main, which I think is in here, like this bounding box, it would work. But if I wanted to be more specific, I could say on like first square. So depending on what you want to target, then it'll work. Okay, so there's tons and tons of different ways of handling form submissions, but the way we'll look at is using jQuery. So I've added just a little submit form into my jQuery or my HTML. So this is all I've added is just form, which is an HTML tag, input type text, and button type submit, submit, which is the text that we see here, close button, close form. Cool, so that's all we need to see of the HTML. Forms. Yeah, so got exactly that. And now for form submission, so we're targeting the form. Oh, no, not yet. Almost, so close. Okay, we're targeting the form by using form as the tag name. And then the dot submit is like the dot on or the dot click. So it knows it's submit because we've told it in here it's type submit. So it's figuring it out from that. Then perform this function. Event prevent default is basically on submit, the browser is going to try and refresh the page. So to stop that from happening, we're going to say event.prevent default, which prevents like the default action. Okay, so that's what we have so far. So we've got form.submit function prevent default. And then what I want to do is I'm going to try and console log the input. And we're using another helper function here, which is .val, which collects the value that the user inputted. So when I have console log here, can anyone guess where that's going to end up? Mark?
Do you have to have a console open or in the
Developer tools. Yeah, exactly. Ignore the angry red lines for now. They're not important. So now, hopefully, cheetah. When I press submit, I get cheetah prints out. And that's how we collect information from forms. How's everyone feeling about jQuery?
Still a little bit of a black box.
Cool. That's good. There's lots of practice now. And hopefully it'll be guided through it in Compass. The main things to remember with jQuery are you can access elements the same way you would in CSS. And you can manipulate them by adding animations, show, hide. Everything that you do in jQuery goes inside of your index.js. This is your JavaScript file. Don't forget to add it to, I think you've already done that, or you've added it to your project, but don't forget to add the script tags into the, just before the closing body tag. Yeah. Any questions? All right. I will leave you to Compass. I won't leave you.